Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you this morning.
Sort of.
I
Um,
always started out the same way. It's always good to see you in the morning.
yeah, and I always say something like Happy June or something, but Happy Summer. How
Uh,
are things over there? Like you're in England or something.
yeah.
Um, anyway, this is a continuation of a discussion about using the summer. How'd you title this one? Using the summer to
Just
end the
avoid
chaos?
to avoid chaos.
Right.
Scheduling the summer to avoid chaos. And yes, and today we're going to talk more about more specifics about how to help
Yeah, how to do it.
parents.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
we want to begin with the idea that all institutions have some kind of schedule.
right,
Schools and colleges, banks and businesses, military, even athletic events. And the more important the organization, I guess the military would be the most important organization, the stricter the schedule. And
well,
that's one of the things you hear about the military is
right.
that everything's scheduled.
Exactly. And I tell parents, if you think about what a kid's life is like when once they go to school, like
Right,
no other time, except for maybe in the military, at no other time will it be where they know that they go to lunch at like 11:33.
right,
Like
right.
that specific time,
Hmm.
11:33 is when we are scheduled to go to lunch. Not 11:35 because then you're getting too late, and not 11:30 because that's too early.
Right, right.
There's going to be other people in there. So it's 11:33. And so routines and schedules like at schools are very, very precise.
Right. And regardless of the organization, you have these very strict schedules. And the more important the mission, such as the military, the stricter the schedule.
Right.
But many of us have little or no structure in our homes. We have
Right.
almost some places have no schedule. People just sort of move about as they please. And yet homes and families also have an important mission.
Right.
Uh, so there is a need for structure and organization, and we get that with a schedule. Now, most homes are scheduled almost accidentally by work schedules and school schedules.
Absolutely. There is so much of our life. If we, because we always try to be pragmatic, very, very realistic when it comes to our recommendations for things. And
Mhm.
we fully recognize that we could sit here because this is what's in self-help books. This is the problem with self-help books sometimes is it
Right.
presents it as though, hey, you know what? Just make sure that you have dinner at 5 o'clock every day.
Right.
Most of us don't get home until 5:30 or 6 o'clock. And
Right.
one thing could go wrong and it will be 6:30 or 7 o'clock that you're home. And so we fully recognize that our schedule is often, factors involving our schedule is often imposed upon us by other people, by our jobs, by school, by something else.
Right.
We don't always have complete control over.
That's right. But what about a schedule that you design that is structured and maintained to make your family less chaotic and more efficient? I
Right.
mean, we know that externals can structure your life, but what about structuring your home so that it really works for you?
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here is that homes, families are important institutions. They are as important as any other institution. All those other institutions have schedules. Why
Right.
not have a schedule at home?
Right.
It's absolutely essential to have some sort of a schedule. And as we said in the previous podcast, if you don't have a schedule,
Yeah.
if you can't impose a schedule on your family, you're probably not going to accomplish much else. Okay.
Right. And in the last podcast, we also talked about you kind of mentioned importantly a few things that certainly influence that. Like, we mentioned how our homes and our environment are often battling against us and trying to fall apart. We talked about our air conditioning here at the office and stuff. We talked about how kids are trying to resist some of those tendencies. All of our kids, when you try to put them to bed at night or try to tell them that it's bedtime, yeah, you might have to tell them, many of our kids, we have to tell them every night that it's bedtime.
Right. Right.
This has been our bedtime every night for the past,
Right.
3,000 years or so it seems, um, it's still bedtime. You still, and we still have to remind our kids that it's bedtime because they are going to push and they're going to resist some of those
Mhm.
tendencies and some of those designs whenever they can.
Right.
We talked about how parents are tired and
Yeah,
parents have their own needs. And so all of these things we recognize sort of work against our attempts to bring some structure and all to our lives, but we still have to work through and it's still there's still a lot of importance to building a schedule and bringing some order to the chaos.
that's right. So we want to be a little bit more mindful about this,
Mhm.
knowing that everything is trying. I don't want to say they're working against you. That's
Yeah,
maybe stating it, but we know that the tendency is, and there's a word for that. I forgot what it is, but there's a word that describes ennui, that the thing's sort of just going to fall apart. Left to their own. Houses are always trying to fall apart. Children are always being a little bit resistant. And it's happening when you're very tired. I mean, if you're a parent, you're probably tired, and you have your own needs that you're trying to get met in one way or another. So on the one hand, we acknowledge that everything's working against you. And we also apologize because we forgot how difficult that I certainly have. Bernie, you're reintroduced to it again with a second family. I had forgotten how difficult toddlers, tweens, and teens can be. It's easy for me to give advice. You and I were college professors at one point in our career. We
Mhm.
taught college classes. Man, this stuff is easy to teach.
Mhm.
I mean, I can just outline this stuff and say, this is all you need to do
Just
to
do
get.
it.
So this is easy to teach. It's easy for therapists, for counselors to give advice that sounds completely rational, reasonable, and normal. And you start to feel guilty if you can't do it because we make it sound so easy.
Yeah,
But now that I'm watching it in my grandchildren, I realize how frustrating and difficult it really is to do.
right.
So talking about it is easy, doing it is another task entirely.
Yeah,
So what we've done in this podcast is we want to list several steps that we think you can follow as you try to impose. And I don't mean impose in a harsh way. I mean in a gentle way. You could, that you want to impose a schedule on your home and your family.
right.
And so we're going to talk about the several steps that we want to discuss.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you said that about imposing. We don't mean necessarily forcing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
a lot
Hmm.
of times, building schedules and routines is best done collaboratively, working with your kids,
Hmm.
and working with, obviously everybody in the home working together to come up with what is going to be our best schedule. Because that buy-in, that agreement
Hmm.
tends to make things a bit easier as you're moving forward. So you're right. So step one, and we mentioned this in the last one, sort of, near the end of the last
Hmm.
podcast, is the importance of for parents to figure out how much control they need
Hmm.
in their home with their
Right.
children. You mentioned, wisely in the last podcast that too much control, authoritarian type control is problematic because, you know, kids will often say, well, I can't do that when dad's home. But if they're not home, then I don't have to do that.
Right.
Um, Having too much control, kids are going to find some way to work around that, and
Right.
it's going to be very frustrating. And you're going to feel like you're punishing your kids all the time, and your kids are going to feel like you're punishing them all the time. And so you don't want to have too much control, but at the same time, you can't have no control. Like you have to have some management of things.
Mhm.
You have to be able to tell your kid, no, it is time to turn things off and go to bed.
Right.
You have to be able to tell your kid, no, you need to stop because you're not just eating Takis all day long. You're going to come and have dinner.
Yeah.
You have to have some control.
Right. And then how much will they tolerate?
Right,
You also have to think about who the kids that I'm raising and how much can they tolerate. Some can tolerate a lot of control. Some
right.
need a lot of control. Most children don't.
Hmm.
So we would
And
advise.
what's interesting with it is that a lot of times kids will push back against control, while at the same time there is something within them that knows that they need some control. And they even become, they talk to us about that,
Right.
where, well, they don't care. They don't even tell me. They don't even tell me when to go to bed.
Right.
And they don't, they will verbalize that I don't want you to tell me to go to bed. I don't want you to tell me to do these things. But at the same time, they know that if you don't, they're
Hmm.
not going to get it done.
That's right. Um, oh, we could talk forever about that.
Yeah.
We talk about the brain not maturing until you're in your mid-20s. What doesn't mature are the executive functions, the
Hmm.
frontal lobe of the brain. And one of those is planning and organization. And kids just don't do that very well. Even teenagers don't. So when we say impose, that's kind of what we're talking about is you have to function as sort of your kids' frontal lobes. They're not going to make those decisions as an adult would. So we have to help them make those decisions for them. Also, we don't want kids just, parents will say, well, it's not until I'm screaming at her that she does what I ask. Well, that's because you don't have a schedule and you're relying simply on brute force to do what a really good schedule will do.
Richard, I was talking to a guy the other day, he's a teenager, and I'll make this quick because this wasn't planned to discuss, but it's funny. I was talking to him the other day, and we were talking about control. He's a 17-year-old kid, and he was talking about how wants some control in his life, and that the only way that he knows to get control over his life is just to take it. Um, and I said, well, tell me what that means.
Hmm.
And he feels as though the only way that he can have any control over his life, is to just do what he wants to do, regardless of what anybody
Hmm.
tells him to do. And and this obviously leads to plenty of problems at home and
Wow.
in other areas of his life. And you try to talk to him about this idea of, well, how can you earn the opportunity to have control? Like, you demonstrate that you can manage responsibilities, and oftentimes parents will give you some more control over your life when you demonstrate that you can handle that control. And his world view, his world experience is that that doesn't work. And so, that suggests to me perhaps that parents tend to have too much control. And so they're not allowing this guy to explore things and to manage some things in his life. And so his perspective, now that he's reached later adolescence, is that he's just going to take it.
Right.
And
Hmm.
so that authoritarian approach that a lot of parents have, that is one of the risks that you face, is that at some point they're going to potentially push back. And, what are you going to do? How are you going to make them do some
Right.
of these things?
And that's why we encourage parents to give kids responsibility so that they learn how to manage.
Right,
That's what you really want. You want them to be able to do it themselves. This
right,
kid's 17 years old and he still hasn't been given the opportunity
right,
to have any control over his life.
right,
So, step one is think about how much control you need and can impose. Second, pick your battles. Very common phrase, pick your battles, but you can't do everything.
right.
So don't lay out this butcher paper and say, okay, I'm going to redesign the entire house. No, you can't do everything, so don't try. Instead, do a couple of things or do one thing well. And start with the easy stuff.
Right.
Okay. Start with what's really, really easy. The toughest thing is for many families is getting your kids to bed at night. All right. So don't start with that. Start with something easy like kids, before you do anything else, I want to make sure that we clean the kitchen in the
Right.
morning. Okay, let's clean up the morning mess so that the kitchen is ready for the second meal of the day. That's something that's much easier to accomplish than getting kids ready for bed. So
Uh,
do the easy stuff, get it right, and then move on.
Absolutely. Step three is to do exactly what we mentioned a moment ago, and that is to get some agreement. You,
Right.
you have to this is a collaborative process that you have to use in working with everybody in the home.
Hmm.
Parents, it's almost, well, I say it's obvious, but maybe not, that both parents have to be on the same page.
Mhm.
if one parent does it one way and the other parent does it a different way, or one parent says, "Don't worry, your mom's not home. You guys can stay up a little bit later."
Mhm.
Now we know, the kids know that, oh, okay, when mom's not home, we can push those limits. We don't have to follow the schedule when mom's not home. No, everybody has to be on the same page. The kids have to be on the same page. The parents have to be on the same page. Everybody has to be doing it. So we have to have agreement from everyone.
Mhm. You go clean your room. I'm going to continue watching TV. Kids don't buy that stuff. I mean, they will. I understand about obedience. I had a friend, and I've mentioned this on podcasts before. This was many, many, many years ago, generational years ago. If we stayed at his house on a Friday night, if we did an overnight, because he lived right across from the high school where all the playing fields were, so
Mhm.
we would want to stay at his house. So then we get up early in the morning and go play. If you stayed at his house on Friday night, every Saturday morning, his mother cleaned the house, and he had to help her do that. I mean, run the vacuum, move the furniture, change the beds. And if you stayed at his house, you were going to be a part of that, or you were not invited back. And
Right.
so, but he was doing that with his mother. She didn't sit and give commands. She asked him, she made him help her. Well, most kids are going to be willing to help their parents clean a house. They're not going to say, no, no, mom, you do that yourself. No, most kids will help. But if you tell your kid, you go clean it, I'm going to go, that probably isn't going to work as well.
Right.
So get an agreement.
Right.
What came to mind is a dog sled for some reason. And I said, imagine if all the dogs were going in different directions. That
Right.
stuff wouldn't go. I mean, nothing would happen.
Right.
So get some agreement. Sit down with your kids, know your children, and what are they willing to do? And they're much more likely to do things with you than do things on command.
Right. Yeah, and there are, of course, kids who feel like I met one not too long ago who feels like, no, that's mom's job.
Yeah, right.
And
I
now
mean,
you have to now that's maybe introducing a completely different set of problems that we have to deal with
mm,
therapeutically and everything. But one key to this is making sure that the task that you're asking your kids to do is age appropriate.
right.
You can't send, maybe even an 8-year-old. You can't send an 8-year-old into his or her room that's a tornado went through there. You
Mhm,
can't send an 8-year-old in there and say, clean your room without any direction or any guidance or any support. It's really just not going to happen.
right.
At least not going to happen in the way that you want it to. So the parent has to provide some scaffolding, perhaps. You might need to go in there and say, just first step, just get all the clothes off the floor. Second step, get all the Legos back in the box.
Right.
You have to go in there and give one step at a time to make sure that they get it done. But when you make sure that it's age dependent and when you make sure that you're all working together, it
Right.
makes it much, much easier.
Yeah, parents, think of yourselves as training wheels. You're in there instructing and helping and guiding. You're not going to do that when they're 16. You only have to do it when they're younger, but you're the training wheels. And eventually you're going to be able to take the training wheels off because if you've done this over and over and over again, eventually your children are going to learn how to do it on their own. And they're
Right.
going to do it the way you taught them to do it.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So step four, measure twice, cut once. In other words, plan, 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 have a plan. Know what you're going to do, know what the expectation is. And be careful about being too ambitious. What we would say is that famous line in business, undercommit and overdeliver. Don't be too ambitious because many parents just want to organize everything and say, we're going to do this and this and this and that. You're not going to do it all.
Right.
So undercommit, just keep your goals very, very small. Also, plan for the contingencies. What are we going to do if one of our children resists, or one of our children demands, or what are you going to do if you get resistance? Okay.
Right. And certainly there's going to be things that you can't plan for, obviously. But you know your kids well enough. I'm sure that you know your kids well enough to know what kind of conflicts or what kind of pushback you might
Mhm.
receive.
Mhm.
And you know, I know that you're going to there are those who are saying, well, wait a minute, you just said that if step three was that if you get an agreement, then everybody's going to do it.
Mhm.
Right. But
Mhm.
again, just as the house is always trying to fall apart, kids are going to tend to want to get out of some of
For
these
sure.
things, you know. I've have said before, I equally dislike chores. I don't like having to spend my Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings or anytime cleaning the house and doing all of that stuff. I don't like doing that. Why would I expect my kid to do that? Why would I expect my teenager to like doing that?
Yeah.
So if they can get out of it, certainly they will.
Right.
But if you
Mhm.
but you give those reminders and you say, hey, remember that it's Saturday, so we got to do these things before we can get going. We have to, clean the house before you can go over to the ball fields. Um, they're going to be more likely to do it, but you're going to have to remind them. But be prepared for that. Plan for that.
That's right. And when we talk about planning for contingencies, let's say you just you say that, okay, honey, it's your turn to do the dishes tonight, and your child said, I can't touch food, or you have to clean the bathroom and say, I'm not going to touch any, I'm not going to clean the bathroom. That's a time for collaborative problem solving. Okay, what will it take? And maybe you're going to have to buy your children rubber gloves or something. But there's a solution for each thing. And you'll discover that some kids just have phobias about something. We can work around those phobias, okay? And you're not going to ask your children to do something they psychologically can't do. I mean, we understand that. So, but have a contingency. What are you going to do if the unexpected happens?
Right,
Once you have a plan, you're going to start small. The next thing is you have to implement that plan gently,
right,
and then you want to evaluate whether it's effective or not. And if it's not as effective as you want, or you've encountered problems, then you make adjustments.
right,
What you can't do is say, "Oh, this doesn't work."
right.
No, it may not work, okay? But all you have to do is make the adjustments you need to make in order to make it work.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes into what we would say is that step six, and that is just progress monitoring, making sure that
Right.
things continue to work and, assessing along the way. You're going to get varying levels of participation and probably varying levels of participation from day to day or week to week. There's going to be times when your kids are much more likely to participate, and then other times when they're going to be much less likely to participate. Figure out and monitor well enough to where you can see what some of those patterns are. If you notice, every time my teenager goes to the football game on Friday night, it is much more difficult to get him or her to do their work the next morning. Okay.
Right.
So now you can have a conversation. You can say, I'm not noticed that on Saturday mornings after you go to a football game on Friday night, I noticed that Saturday mornings it's really tough for you to meet those expectations. What can we do about that? Because we still need to do work on Saturday morning.
Mhm.
So that makes me feel like we need to put some limitations on what you're doing on Friday night or what time you come home on Friday night. Kids will, if you're working with them and not being authoritarian and not imposing and being punitive and confrontational about it, kids will work with you on that. They'll say,
Right.
no, you're right. Let me see what, I still want to go to the football game, so I'll try to do better on Saturday mornings.
Or maybe you have to move Saturday morning from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock.
Right.
Okay. But bring your children into the problem solving process. Okay.
Right.
It'll work much better. Um, when you implement, you're going to notice that you're going to get everything from passive avoidance to active defiance. As you were talking, I was thinking, I had three children, and I remember we used to try to clean the garage. We finally gave up, but we used to try to clean the garage. So I had three kids. Every kid was each one of my kids was different. One of them kept disappearing. One of my kids, we'd be out there working. I was saying, well, where's so and so? And he'd be in the house playing video games. Okay, he would just keep escaping. Another child, very, very cooperative. We could count on that child to cooperate, do what we asked, be completely involved in the project. And the third one would start playing. We'd take stuff out of the garage, like toys or something, and we'd find her playing with the toys, having a tea party in the corner. So there's three kids, all of them. So each kid was different. So you must expect that your children are going to react, each child will react differently. And you're going to get everything from passive avoidance to active defiance. We had a listener uh, contact us this week about something like active defiance. What if I can't get my child to do this? You need to be very careful with those things. You need to be very careful how you handle these differences because, first of all, you want to avoid power struggles. You don't want to get screaming and yelling because I said so.
Hmm.
And you also don't want to create martyrs because if you're too harsh with a sibling, the
Hmm.
other siblings are going to say, "Wow, that was sort of over the top, Dad. I don't like when you treat him that way or talk to him that way." So don't turn that child into a martyr.
Right.
Okay, so be careful how you handle those differences.
Yeah, and as you're looking at your days, there are sort of three nuclear hours
Mhm.
or linchpins in
Right.
the system, and those are getting out of bed in the morning, meal times, dinner time, and then going to bed at night. These
Right.
these are three times that are sort of that you kind of want to consider them as anchor points in your day. And these tend to be the more challenging times because you want to get you want your kids to go to bed at a certain time. You want them to get up at a certain time. You hopefully want to have meals at a particular time. And so these times are really critical. And we want to help teach our kids sort of these developmental, these sequential times of the day so that, they're not trying to have dinner at 10 o'clock at night, or they're
Right.
not trying to, again, sleep until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mhm.
That there are these rhythms, there are these times of the day that these certain things happen. Other things happen around them and in between them, but these
Mhm.
are the hallmark times and periods of the day that we stick to.
Right. And so think of, as you think about building a schedule, think in terms of teachable lessons, each of which has a developmental sequence. What we mean by that is this. The dinner hour, for example. Think of the dinner hour as a lesson plan, as a time to what do I want to teach my children about this activity in our home? And what you want to teach them is that the dinner hour is preparing the food, eating the food, and cleaning up the mess that we've created. And everybody in the family should be involved in that process, right? And so, but think of it as a teachable lesson. How do I want to teach my kids to do this so that they can do it themselves? When we talk about a developmental sequence, we're talking about older kids will do more and have more responsibility because they can. So, what can an 8-year-old do? What can a 12-year-old do? What can a 16-year-old do? And everybody gets different assignments, and
Mhm.
they will graduate into the next level of difficulty or the next level of responsibility. So think of it as not an obligation that you're going to impose, but a lesson that you're going to teach.
Right.
Okay. And you do
And
that with getting out of bed in the morning, your dinner hour, and getting kids to sleep at night. Think of them as teachable lessons that take time. It's going to take time to do these things. They're not going to happen quickly. It takes time to get it right.
right. And we like to think about this because we like math.
No,
You can
you
think,
like math. I put this in here for you because I thought I know what I'm going to do because Bernie is good in math. He's one of a dying breed, but he's real good in math. So I said, okay, how can we turn this into a mathematical equation?
yeah. Well, and it's true because this is the way that you have to think about it. The first thing is you want to think about the number of people that
Right.
you're managing. 3, 4, 5 people. You have to think about the number of people and the number of tasks.
Right.
So if you think about this is a function of the number of people times the number of tasks, and then any other special circumstances that come about. And so if you have 5 people and 20 tasks, you can divide those things up. And if everybody, there are no special circumstances or anything, that may be pretty straightforward. Everybody gets 4 tasks or so, and they're all developmentally appropriate, and we can go from there. But as soon as you add some other things, if you have a kid with ADHD or a disruptive mood dysregulation disorder or a chronic illness or something like that, or one of the parents is having some memory issues, or one of the parents have a substance abuse issue or something like that, the problems and everything increase exponentially. I mean, it's like you can't, it's almost immeasurable how much more challenging it can be unless you're planning and preparing and sort of anticipating it to some extent.
That's
So
right.
you
Hmm.
have to think about it in terms of these sort of three things: the number of people, the number of tasks, and any other special circumstances. And for most parents, you know all of that, you have all of those details ahead of time.
Right.
We know all those things.
Right. I think in particular about imagine the effect that moving an elderly grandparent
Hmm.
into your family home
Right?
have on that. Now, even if there's no dementia, bringing another person
Right?
into the home, you go from five to six, but it doesn't increase a little. It increases, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Okay. And so as you plan, you have to plan for the people that you have and the task demands that each of those people bring. If you have a child with severe ADHD, this all becomes much more difficult
Hmm.
than if you have three kids who don't have ADHD. All right. So keep that in mind as you make your plans, is that you it not remember we talked about that football play where you have people working against you.
Right.
Okay, so you're going to have some star athletes on the other side,
Right.
working very hard to take this thing apart, but you have to deal with each one of those.
Absolutely. So wrapping up, so summer is a great time because
Right.
because you don't have external factors such as school that
Mhm.
impose on the time and schedule and demands on your kids. So summer is a great time to implement and to develop these types of schedules and routines. Um, be careful that you don't go too far, that you don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Make sure that you start small and you just keep building on those successes, because that's going to give you more motivation. That's going to give your kids more motivation because they're going to see that it's successful and that it's helping them achieve what they want to achieve. And so start small and just keep building it over the course of the next 2 months or so. And then hopefully by the time August comes around and school's starting back, you'll have a pretty good system in place so that now you're just adding in the new component of school.
Right. And as you do this, whether it's children or the adults in your life, think of the summer as a time when you want to renew the joy of being
Right.
together. You also want to enjoy your time. You've had a lot of frustration during the academic year. Let's get together and learn how to enjoy each other again. Summer also provides the opportunity for us to really enjoy each other and build some really good memories.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that is it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.